this journey actually began with failure. The idea that you may have a primary website like Vodafone.com go down is not good for reputations. We have to move headless. We have to go composable. Not necessarily.
No.
There is still a role for monolithic stacks. The benefit of headless, flexibility, a speed and a certainty. I think it's that coming together between the marketeers and the developers and the implementation of technology that's really exciting.
Well, it's a bit like that whole Avengers Assemble piece, isn't it?
Yes.
You're specialist in this area, they're specialist in that area, and that's where the real innovation starts to happen. It isn't a project, it's an ongoing, living, breathing thing that's going to need to be consistently evolved. It's not, oh, I'm building a website and then there it is, it's lovely and it doesn't ever change.
You're right. And technology doesn't stand still. Once you've done your first replatforming, that's the start, it's not the finish.
So, hello Sam, and welcome to Marketing the Madness. I feel very privileged actually to have you here today because not only have you spoken for Street or for me for a client event, but you've also spoken at the Mac 2 conference, which I had the pleasure of watching you at. So I know my audience are going to learn a lot from today's podcast. Before we get into, I guess, the subject which we're going to dig into today, which is around how technology can really help you tell stories and how you've been doing that for Vodafone Group, rather than me introduce you, I'm actually going to ask you, because I know I'm going to get your job title wrong, to introduce yourself and tell us what your current role involves at Vodafone Group.
Thanks for having me. So Sam Billett, I'm a Senior Digital Solutions and Comms Manager for Vodafone Group. I'm based within the External Affairs Division and specifically the Corporate Affairs team. My role is to implement technologies and platforms that enable us to get the business out there, telling its story, and increasingly trying to be more creative in how we tell that story.
Which is, I mean, you've really, I think, for me, everything that I've heard, and I'm very lucky to have some incredibly fantastic tech clients in the space, and the stories that I've heard you tell around the transformations that you've been able to, I guess, make at Vodafone Group, because your history isn't necessarily in tech, it's more in comms. I think you've brought a really fresh perspective and probably enabled, I guess, Vodafone Group to innovate and do things a bit differently that maybe someone who'd come in, doing your role, who was a techie, may not have thought about. So I think that kind of blend of comms, creative, and the innovative ideas that you've had because you're not techie has been super interesting.
That's kind of you to say. I think what we're seeing now is a real shift in terms of how businesses approach technology when it comes to their storytelling, to their comms, to their marketing, to their brand. I think in the past, technology was something that sat firmly outside of the wheelhouse for most people. You engaged with your developers when you needed something. But increasingly, there's a convergence that's happening now, and especially around owned media, and the ability to implement the correct technology that allows you to run the campaigns that you need to run. So coming at this from a communications background, a politics background, it's really been about crossing that Rubicon into technology and having those difficult conversations with the developers. And the conversations tend to go something like, well, folks, here's what we need. And the developers say, well, here's what you can have. And we go back and say, yes, but that doesn't quite deliver X, Y, and Z. It's not going to land the campaigns in the way in which we need it. At which point they, back in the day, would have said, well, that's never been done before. And that's what we're in the business of. It's also about transformation. So that agreed. It's then about coming back over the Rubicon and explaining these inherently complex things, this technology, the investment that's going to be required to build it, and explaining it in a way that executives and senior leaders can understand it. And again, coming from a communications background, it enables me to use those skills that I've acquired over my career to, I suppose, build the consensus to influence, and when it's required, increasingly speak some truth to power.
Yeah, and, sometimes buy some developers some cupcakes, maybe, I don't know, or Monster Munch sandwiches, which is my experience with. I mean, I've worked at a lot of digital transformation agencies, and developers, I feel really bad. I'm really like classifying them in a way here, but they are quite. To be able to code in the way that developers code, they are a very different animal, maybe to someone like you or I who works in marketing and comms. So there's definitely a bridge to gap in terms of getting them on side, enabling, getting them to do their best work and pushing the boundaries of what might be possible.
From my experience, developers inherently want to innovate. And I think when they meet with other stakeholders from whether it's another side of a business or if it's a client, whatever shape and form that takes, I think when there's a challenge and there's a technical solution being sought that doesn't exist yet, there's a real opportunity to engage and do something exciting. And from my experience, and what I'm really enjoying about my role now, is I'm getting to work with people in a different sector, coming at things from a different perspective, and yet who are exceptionally bright, are passionate. Yes, to your point, the Monster Munch sandwiches and the rest. I mean, there is a quirkiness to developers, but it's a good one. And I think where different stakeholders can come together and do something truly innovative and find consensus, it's exciting, and great things tend to come out of that collaboration.
Yeah.
It's also about empowering developers so that they're better understood, because I think developers inherently work within their space. They know what they know, but they're not inherently or necessarily communicators in that sense. And sometimes it's a challenge to communicate inherently challenging technical issues in a way that people understand it. And I think it's that collaboration now that you're increasingly seeing from marketeers, comms, brand with developers that's really exciting. And there's a lot now happening in this space.
Yeah, well, that's actually what I'm going to ask you about next.
Right.
So the challenges that you face, and I guess, the brief that you had on joining Vodafone Group, obviously you've enable or technology and what you've been, I guess, brought in to do at Vodafone Group has changed a lot of things. When you came in, obviously you came from a comms background, which is a little bit different to, I guess, what you're doing now to a certain extent. But tell me, when you were kind of put into this new role at Vodafone Group, what were your objectives and what was it that you were trying to fix, challenge, change? What were you trying to take the Vodafone Group towards?
When I was initially brought in on this brief, it was to deal with a replatforming regarding the main website Vodafone.com that was going a little awry, and we had servers being switched off, but a replatforming that had to be achieved in time, and it wasn't quite working. So the start of this journey actually began with failure. This was a burning platform. There were timelines, there were deadlines. And if we didn't get it resolved, the ramifications were significant. We are a tel-tech company working within the external affairs division. Our North Star is reputation. Also in the business of communications, the idea that you may have a primary website like Vodafone.com go down is not good for reputation. So initially I was brought in on a sort of a crisis aversion situation. And the good news is we got that replatforming done. But what became apparent through that was there were bigger strategic issues going on around the platform, namely, Vodafone.com serves 37 different dependencies. That's probably over 250 plus people involved within that. And those stakeholders, those 37, had never been consulted at any point around what they needed that Vodafone platform to do. So using my comm skills, that's where I went to work. And that started with engaging independently with those 37 to really understand what are your strategic aims and objectives over the next year, 18 months, 2 years. What is the role of Vodafone.com in that? What do you need that to do? So that we can go away and build a picture of actually how do we evolve this website to serve its stakeholders, to land the campaigns in the way that we need them to land. So that was the big challenge, because they'd never been consulted before. And often in large organizations, especially who have different objectives, different strategies that they're executing, this isn't necessarily something that they've thought of before, because the functionality hadn't existed. And also a nervousness that, are you coming along to put more work on my plate that hasn't been factored in before when I'm already stretched and don't have enough resource as it is. So being able to come in and identify where the consensus lies and what are the solutions to that was where we had real impact. And what we were then able to do was to present back to those stakeholders and say, look, here's the direction of travel. Here are the benefits. Here's how we're going to do it. Do we have your buy-in? Which we did. To then take that to executives to say, okay, now we need some cash and a mandate in order to deliver it. And, I'm fortunate to work at Vodafone and Vodafone Group with brilliant people, with executives who really listen and go to bat to try and get you the resources that you need. And that's what happened.
Amazing. I mean, that employee engagement piece is so important, because you've got to, it's hard, you're developing a huge digital transformation program. People are going to get nervous. Most people don't like change, right? I mean, I quite do, but not everyone is built that way. So actually, you talk about something super important there that I think when you're looking at these big digital transformation programs and you're implementing something quite big, which is going to be a lot of work, it's how do you bring, how do you convince the organization and all of its employees, all the people that are going to contribute to that, to go on that journey with you?
I think the trick there was not just doing a big unveil. It's about approaching things gradually. It's evolution, not revolution, in that sense. Starting small and building big. And I think the fact that we were able to go to our stakeholders, not asking anything of them, but actually going back and providing solutions to often issues, challenges that exist across all of those teams, but they've been looking at them in isolation. So I think a sort of all for one for all was an important part of our journey. But also recognizing that once you've done your first replatforming, that's the start. It's not the finish. Okay, so yeah, it was our gradual approach to transformation that I think won the day, and taking those stakeholders with you, so that when you're presenting a final solution, it's almost I've seen this before. I've already approved that. Great. Well, let's go. Yeah. And I think it's been our ability to move quickly. And to implement technology that's been a bit ahead of its time in Vodafone has given us a bleeding edge, and solutions that are maybe a year or so ahead of where the business is currently operating.
That's where it gets super interesting, is the types of technologies that you've been able to implement at Vodafone Group. And I know some of them because, of course, some of them are my lovely clients. So, I feel it would be wrong if we didn't talk about them. But you were just referencing how those platforms have helped you get way ahead of where the group was. There's a lot of talk about headless, and most people now, understand, what composable technologies are. But for those that don't, because I do feel like that is the future, and that is what has enabled you to start this journey and, move ahead more quickly. It is enabling faster, quicker development. Can you, first of all, for my lovely listeners, because you're going to do a much better job than I can, kind of put your explanation on composable or headless or Mac technologies, and then I'm going to ask you another question after that.
Right. I'm going to do my best here. Let's see how far I come. Right, a test.
I'm really mean doing this.
So look, off the bat, I think, yes, great that people are talking about composable, headless technology. I think there is a push, certainly for people who are beginning their transformational journeys, that are saying, well, we have to move headless, we have to go composable. Not necessarily.
No.
There is still a role for monolithic stacks. I think you're right, the future is heading that way, to that decoupled architecture. But I think, or I sense, a lot of people feel under pressure to get to that headless piece quick. But I think, first of all, you've got to take a step back and actually understand, is now the right time for that? As part of a gradual transformation process, as I was alluding to earlier, maybe it's not starting with ripping out your monolithic and putting in a headless. There's a big role for monolithic still to play. So I'd urge those in this journey not to just rush into it off the bat. Why did we take the decision to go headless? Well, again, it came from that engagement with our stakeholders, the 37. And what became clear was there were similar needs, but also competing needs. Understanding the wider ecosystem of Vodafone and its websites, that many teams operating off different CMSs, etc., computer management systems. So the benefit of headless from our perspective was twofold. The first was it gave us a flexibility and a speed and a certainty, because, again, our North Star is reputation, the website being up and present. With headless, even if our CMS or backend goes down, the front end's still up. So the website's always there. We might not be able to develop on it or publish on it for that set period of time, whether it's minutes, hours, or a day. But the website's always up. So that's the first bit. I think also it's the ability in due course to have technology that's a bit ahead of its time, that allows for the wider unification piece in the future, whereby you'll have teams that are operating on a CMS that works for them. They don't need to change that CMS coming in. You can take those CMSs, plug them into a middle layer that then presents with a seamless front end for the customer experience. So working with the stakeholders, it just became clear that a monolithic stack wasn't going to work for us. So implementing that headless composable architecture was crucial. And we did it. But it also took a lot of work to explain to the business this new approach that we're taking. And it comes back to that consensus piece. You know, you've got to have everyone corralled and focused on why you're doing this, why the investment, and what are the benefits of that going to be.
Sam, I think that is possibly the best explanation of composable and Mac that I've ever had. In fact, I'm going to get all my team to listen to this, because obviously we work on a lot of these strategies, and it's quite there is quite a lot to get your head, no pun intended, there is quite a lot to get your head round in terms of headless technology. So you've positioned it really beautifully and easy. That's because you're in comms, you know what you're doing.
Well, this is it, but it's also about sort of knowing where your line or your limit is. I mean, yes, I've had to upskill and learn more about technology. A lot of that's just been through doing, being at the coalface, working with your developers, listening to your developers, but also knowing where your line is, where you hand over. So yes, I mean, the explanation I've given there is very much based on how I've perceived it and seen it as a solution to the challenges that we at Vodafone Group are dealing with and overcoming. Others will give you different explanations for it, but it's also about knowing where your limit is and where you hand over to your experts. I'm never going to compete with a developer who's been doing this for 15 years, right? But likewise, a developer is not going to be able to do what I do from a comms marketing brand side, given this has been my bread and butter for 15 years. Yeah. So it's to the earlier point. I think it's that coming together between the marketeers and the developers and the implementation of technology that's really exciting, because It's understanding what the required output is, but also what you have to do to put the technology in place to deliver that output.
Yeah, well, it's a bit like that whole Avengers Assemble piece, isn't it? Like,
Yes.
you're specialist in this area, they're specialist in that area, and that's where I guess the real innovation starts to happen, because you're all coming with different views, different ideas, but to build something together, which hopefully starts to change the game, which is exactly what you've done, at Vodafone Group. Now, I have to do this.
Yes.
Because, at any point you can say, Katie, stop asking me these questions. You're really annoying and you're asking all the things I'm not allowed to say, but I'm going to ask them anyway.
Okay.
So
where's this going?
Well, you don't know. It's not going anywhere too dangerous. Don't worry. Okay. The platforms that you've used, because I know a lot of the people listening, are sitting in team, or either in a company that's trying to make these, technological changes within the business. Which technologies have you used, or are you looking at, or can really help people that are trying to go on this digital transformation journey?
It's a good question. And the only reason why I hesitate is that there's no one single platform that's going to suit, that's right for everyone. I think what's really important is in the conversations with your developers, with your technical team, whether that's in-house or agency, is to really understand where they sit in terms of use of technologies. So we've been very fortunate at Vodafone Group that I've been able to work with an outfit called Dauntless, who I've worked with for many years now, and they're fantastic. Brilliant advisors, really astute, brilliant on the technical perspective. But one of the things I've always respected about Dauntless is they've never committed or put in place agreements with any one platform. So when they're looking at our requirements and making suggestions about our platforms or which direction of travel we should consider, it's independent. It's not guided by a partnership that already exists. They are making recommendations purely based on your requirements. So I think that's really important when you're working with agencies or in-house. Are there already existing relationships with platforms? Understand that first. I think when you can ascertain that you're getting real independent recommendations on platforms, listen to it and then delve into a bit more of the detail. Now, in our case, we've been through several replatformings. We have been on AEM. We've moved to Drupal. From Drupal, we're now right in the middle of a replatforming to Contentful on our back end. And for the last 18 months, we've been running our front end, decoupled front end, with Netlify. So that's where we landed. There are many others in the market that are also very good, that we considered. But also it's about the relationship that you forge with those platform providers, because you're going to have to work with them. There are going to be challenges, curveballs that come up. Their ability to listen, to react, to treat you independently as a customer, as a standalone, not sort of pigeonholing you into a whole group of customers where your priorities might sit further down. That's another important factor. So that's how we ended up with Contentful, soon to be, and Netlify. And look, we've been very impressed with the quality of service, the delivery.
Amazing. I mean, that agnostic approach, having worked mainly actually throughout the last, pre-setting up Street, and now working with a lot of the agencies and the tech companies that provide or build the solutions, that agnostic approach is really important. And not all, like you say, not all agencies are agnostic. Some of them are fixed on a certain platform. So they're going to give you, the platform. And having sat in an agency, I'm just going to be really honest here. In fact, the agency doesn't exist anymore, so I can be really honest, this is really bad. We worked with Drupal, Sitecore. I'm trying to think which other platforms at the time. Can't remember all of them, which is really bad. Episerve at the time. Can't remember what they're called now. Optimizely, I think, aren't they?
Yes.
So we worked with a whole suite of platforms, and we kind of positioned ourselves as CMS agnostic, but we had 3 or 4. But often We would. You've got to be so careful. We would pitch for the platform that, because they generally they would do the same things. We'd get a brief from a client. I would take it to, we kind of had like a suite of senior, developers leading each team. So someone leading the Drupal team, someone leading the Episerver team, someone leading the Sitecore team. Oh, and the other platform was Umbraco. So we had two open source platforms, two, licensed platforms. And I would get them to kind of go, right, give me your argument for why your platform's going to be best fit to solve the technical challenges that I've got for this brief, because I was new biz director. And I would always obviously want to be super authentic because I wanted to win it. And I think that is, but the bum fight that would happen in the house because, the Sitecore team are really busy, but the Umbraco team aren't really busy, was tough sometimes. So you've got that kind of review period and how you assess the platforms. As a client, you've got to be super diligent. You've got to get the right people involved. So how, obviously, using and working with a partner, but how do you manage, making the right decision? I guess because it is tough.
It's you've got to rely on your internal and external partners in this.
Yeah, trust.
And you've got to be guided by your experts. I'm not a definitive tech expert. I've just crossed the Rubicon into it, and I'm here to play and to innovate and to hopefully have impact. Listen to your partners and understand if there's a conflict of interest. That who's the client, and I think that's really important. When we're talking about being agnostic, who are your partners answering to? Is it to you, or is there a third party in play? And I think that's really important in terms of which way do we go? Look, I've sat there and had recommendations of 3 potential providers. I've spent the time with my partners, both externally and internally, to get their knowledge, their experience of these platforms. How often have they been working on these? But then also having conversations directly with those platform providers, because it's about, boiling it down, the question is, are these people I can and want to work with? And that's really important. There's the human factor, there's the practical factor in all of this. And can I see my internal, external partners working with them too? So that also comes into the mix. There's another big differentiator here, which is cost.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which can't be ignored. But I've never been led on cost. I think what I want to understand, first of all, is what is the platform? What is the service? Who are the people? How are we going to collaborate and work together on this? Because there's many parties. I've got external agency, I've got internal teams, I've then got the platform providers. So, understanding that and then looking at cost. Because I think if you're just driven by cost, yes, it might be cheaper, but actually, is it going to be more costly to your resource, your timings, complications, etc.? So you've got to sort of balance those out. That's how I've approached it, and as a formula, it's worked. But not to say there aren't going to be challenges and curveballs that come up in that, and there's always going to be a little bit of conflict at time to time between agency and client and internal.
Yeah.
And I say that having spent a lot of time comms agency side in the earlier stages of my career. So that's how I'd approach it. Don't be driven just by cost. Understand the platform, listen to your partners, and understand the way of working.
Yeah, so true. I wish you were a client of mine back in the day, because I think your view, and I hope the industry is starting to evolve, is traditionally, I was working at digital agencies way back when waterfall projects rather than agile projects were kind of the main thing that we were working on, and it was looked at as what's the cost of the project, without thinking about, exactly like you say, the resource, the ongoing investment, the updates. It isn't a project. It's an ongoing, living, breathing thing that's going to need to be consistently evolved. It's not, oh, I'm building a website and then there it is, it's lovely and it doesn't ever change.
Yeah.
That's just not how it works anymore. It's, the world is changing quicker than ever. And actually, right now, you need to think about the platforms and the setup that's going to enable you to move quickly in the future, not just about what's right for you today.
You're right. And technology doesn't stand still.
No.
So, there will be providers and platforms coming into play shortly that we haven't heard of yet. So I think having, again, in terms of going for the decoupled architecture and the headless on our side, it gives us that flexibility for future technologies. On that, agency point and what you were saying about the waterfall, I couldn't agree more. I remember it well. Yes, it is about agile now, but one of the challenges that you find with going agile is it really also depends on how much process exists within a business. So, you won't be surprised to hear that there is at times some undue amount of process at Vodafone. Not for wrong reasons,
no.
It just exists. But the problem with that is that can kill your agility. And without agility, you can't innovate so well. So, a huge amount of my time is actually spent getting things through the system. And just on that cost piece, many organizations will be driven by cost. But the question you're going to get is, if you've made a recommendation on a platform and it is more expensive than other options, is why? I think as long as you've got the answers to the why, maybe you have to go for the more expensive option, but be equipped with it.
Yeah.
So that you can set out the stall. And frankly, you're going to be better informed than most people around that table, because for so many, it's outside of the wheelhouse. And I think when you can show that, yes, there is maybe a higher capital expenditure to build this, but actually you're going to realize the operating expenditure cost saving within 18 months with, double the amount of output with half the resource in half the time. Actually, this is a more cost-effective option, albeit it looks more expensive off the start line.
Yeah, so true. I mean, that is, or you're leading me quite nicely to my next question, because okay. I was going to ask you, what have been so far, and I know there are some pretty impressive stats here, and forgive me again for asking, because I like to ask the questions that I know my listeners are going to want to hear, but what's it enabled, if you're allowed to tell me, what's this in terms of the financial savings, the return on investment, what's been the outcomes for Vodafone Group so far?
So I can't go into specifics.
No, but you can give me something.
But I can paint a picture.
Yes.
I'll attempt to. So look, our operating costs have drastically reduced over the last 3 years from where they were. But that's only been possible because I'm working in an innovative tech-led business such as Vodafone, where the investment has been made available based on proven business cases. It's not easy to get that, but you make the arguments, you show the proof points, and I'm lucky to work at a business that will then get behind you. So there's been an investment into our builds in order to realize that OpEx saving. So that would be one of the first bits. Better output for less cost on an ongoing basis. So that's point one. I think also it's the speed at which we're able to react. I mean, Vodafone is a multinational company with infrastructure all over the world. There is huge dependency on our services and on our connectivity. Wherever there's flashpoints in the world, and we've just look over the last 5 years of what the world's endured. Vodafone has a strategic infrastructure role within that. So our ability to react and to communicate, but not just to our customers, but to our stakeholders, investors, media, NGOs, a huge amount of people who have a dependency on us. So the speed at which we're able to respond and communicate, that's been a huge uplift. I think it's fair to say we've doubled the amount of output in terms of our news and content and storytelling. Right now, Vodafone.com enjoys over 20 plus million visitors or users a year, delivering over 200 million page views. I think in the last year we published just shy of 1,000 news pieces. And yet with a nimble team, we're corporate affairs at Vodafone Group, all in. That include, all in. I think we're probably 40 people.
Wow.
Which, in the grand schemes, is not huge numbers. But the reason why we're able to do that is because we are working agile. We've got good leadership. We've got a CEO who backs us. We've got brilliant people in our technology division. And increasingly we're coming together and delivering and achieving and thinking about things that we probably weren't doing 5 years ago.
Yeah.
It's an exciting time.
Yeah, what you've started and you're continuing is, a super exciting and very future-focused way forward for Vodafone Group. So, I'm excited to keep watching the journey and see what's next, see who else you bring into the, fantastic tech stack that you're building as well. I have one last question for you. And this is something, I change my last question with my guests. So one of my, I guess values as a person, but is to always be learning. In fact, it's one of my values at Street Agency for all of the team, is to always be learning. So is there a book, a person, a podcast, a group on LinkedIn, I don't know, and it could be anything that you love, trust, learn from, that you think would be good for my listeners to go and check out? So it could be anything. It doesn't have to be a person, but it could be a person.
Okay. So I think if you want to do some reading on wider digital transformation and understanding how you lead a transformation agenda, with executives, I would point your listeners, viewers, towards some of the content coming out of Deloitte online. Some really, really good content in there. I think get involved and learn more about the Mac Alliance in terms of the headless decoupled piece. Mac are doing some fantastic work in terms of explaining this new technology and bringing stakeholders far and wide together in terms of knowledge sharing. So I think learn more from the Mac Alliance on that. In terms of other ways, cross some Rubicons in your own business. Go and have conversations with your technology folk. Go grab that coffee. Seek people out. Go and understand what challenges are happening elsewhere in a business. I think you learn by listening and then by doing. So I sometimes don't look at what you don't have, look at what you do have and go and talk to them. Likewise, external partners, go and meet some agencies, go and understand what's happening out there. I mentioned Dauntless earlier, but there's many others. Novacell, for example, who we also know. Again, doing some great work in this space. So those would be my top tips in terms of wider reading or people to listen to. I think get along to some events. Get along to some conferences. There's some great content going out. There's some great insights. I've learned so much from sitting alongside much more seasoned transformation experts than myself, but who have always been so collaborative and supportive and willing to share. It's something I've really enjoyed about crossing into the technical space. I think there is a greater sort of sense of collaboration and knowledge sharing. And for people who are working in comms now or marketing or brand, I'd urge you, cross your own Rubicon and upskill, learn more about this stuff. You don't have to become an expert, but just know enough to be able to meet others in the middle. And I think you'll be surprised by what you learn, what you can achieve, and how quickly you can actually achieve it.
Yeah. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
You've also set me up there because we obviously host a lot of these events where we're bringing you guys
You do,
together.
yes.
So
Yes.
yeah, if
and that's how we first met. Yeah, of course.
exactly.
Yeah.
So if anyone is interested, then please give me or pop me a message. Thank you, Sam, for teeing me up at the end there. It's been amazing to have you on. I've found today's podcast super interesting. I know my listeners will. So will my clients. So you've basically done me a fantastic job and given a case study for some of my clients as well. So huge thank you. It's been incredibly valuable.
Thanks for having me.